I'd always considered myself a level-headed person, not one to be easily unsettled. That was until my family moved into an old house at the end of Culver Street. The house was a bargain, a fixer-upper with character, as my dad would put it. But it was the basement that held a story I wish I'd never uncovered. The first few weeks were uneventful, filled with unpacking and getting accustomed to our new surroundings. It wasn't until I decided to turn the basement into my personal music studio that things took a dark turn. The basement was spacious but dimly lit, with a lingering mustiness that no amount of air fresheners could mask. One evening, while setting up my equipment, I stumbled upon a small hidden door behind a crumbling wall I was clearing away. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pried it open, revealing a narrow, dark tunnel that seemed to stretch further than the basement wall should allow. The air was cooler here, and something about the silence felt heavy, charged with an unspoken story. I should have turned back, but my curiosity was a raging river, and I was caught in its current. I found a flashlight and ventured in. The tunnel led to a small concealed room, and what I found there sent chills down my spine. Stacks of old dusty tapes labeled with dates and names, a moth-eaten armchair facing a now-defunct video camera, and a wall plastered with photographs of people, their eyes scratched out, leaving voids that seemed to stare into my soul. A sense of dread washed over me as I realized what I had stumbled upon, a Stalkers Den. The previous owner must have been watching people, documenting their lives through these tapes. My stomach churned at the thought of being watched, of someone knowing our every move. The human aspect of this horror was too real, too close to home. I gathered the tapes and decided to go to the police, but as I turned to leave, the sound of the hidden door scraping shut echoed through the room. Panic set in as I realized I wasn't alone. Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. I hid behind the decrepit armchair, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure that entered was tall, shrouded in darkness. He began speaking, though not to me. He was rehearsing the conversation, one side of a dialogue with the person not present, his tone oscillating between anger and affection in a disturbing melody. It was clear this person was unhinged, living in a reality far removed from our own. I waited, paralyzed by fear, until the figure left, talking to himself about a new project. That was my chance. I made my escape, the tapes clutched tightly against my chest, and bolted through the tunnel, not stopping until I reached the safety of the lit basement. The police investigation that followed uncovered the horrifying truth. The previous owner had been a notorious stalker, presumed dead after disappearing years ago. The people in the photos were his victims, some missing, others found under tragic circumstances. The house, especially the basement, was his lair, a place where he planned his sinister activities undisturbed. I narrate this story not as a tale from a book or a movie, but as a warning. Horror doesn't always come in the form of ghosts or supernatural beings. Sometimes it wears a human mask, blending into the ordinary until it's too late. The basement tapes revealed a darkness that lurked not in the shadows, but in the heart of a man whose actions were a true horror story. And while the physical tapes were destroyed, the memories, the fear, they linger. A haunting melody that never quite fades away. My name is Alex, and until last summer I lived in what I believe to be a pretty normal suburban neighborhood. My story isn't one of ghosts or supernatural hauntings, but it's a horror story all the same, one deeply rooted in the darkest corners of human nature. It started when I noticed odd noises coming from the basement of my house. At first I dismissed them as the house settling or maybe rodents that had found their way in. But as the days passed, the noises became harder to ignore. They weren't just random creaks and scurries anymore. It sounded like whispers, the shuffling of feet, the soft thuds of someone trying to move quietly. I mentioned it to my parents, but they brushed it off, attributing it to my overactive imagination. So one night, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, I decided to investigate the basement myself. What I found there was far from what I could have ever imagined. Behind an old stack of forgotten boxes, I discovered a crudely cut hole in the wall, barely visible unless you were looking for it. Heart pounding, I shined my flashlight through the gap and found a small hidden room beyond. It was cramped, filled with items that sent a chill down my spine. A mattress, empty food containers, a collection of knives, and countless photographs of my family taken from angles that could have only been captured from inside the house. I realized then that we weren't alone. Someone had been living in our walls, watching us for who knows how long. The thought that a stranger had been so close, observing us in our most private moments, was terrifying. I wanted to scream, to run, but fear rooted me to the spot. Before I could decide what to do next, I heard a noise behind me, a soft, deliberate step. I turned to see a shadowy figure emerging from the darkness of the basement. My heart stopped. It was a man, his features obscured by the dim light, but his intent was clear. He didn't expect to be discovered, and now that I had found his hiding place, I could see the decision being made in his eyes. He couldn't let me go. Adrenaline kicked in and I ran. I didn't stop to think, I just ran, screaming for my parents, for anyone. The man chased me, but in my panic I managed to escape, slamming the basement door shut and locking it behind me. The police were called and the man was arrested. He was a drifter, they said, with a history of mental illness and violent behavior. He had found his way into our basement months ago and had made it his home, slipping out only at night to steal food and other necessities. The aftermath of the ordeal was surreal. My family was in shock, struggling to come to terms with the fact that our home, our sanctuary, had been violated in such a personal, terrifying way. The basement was thoroughly searched and sealed, and we installed security systems to ensure our safety. But the sense of security we once took for granted was shattered. This experience taught me that horror doesn't always come from the supernatural. Sometimes the most frightening stories are all too real, born from the unpredictability of human behavior. The man in the walls, the watcher of my family, was a living nightmare, a reminder that sometimes the true horror is just a wall away, silently observing, waiting in the shadows. My name is Jake, and what I'm about to tell you is not a tale of the supernatural, but rather a chilling account of a real-life horror that unfolded right beneath our feet in our own basement. It all started innocently enough. My wife Sarah and I had just moved into our dream home, a quaint suburban house with a spacious basement ripe for conversion into a cozy den. Little did we know, the basement held secrets far more sinister than we could have ever imagined. At first, everything seemed normal. We began the renovations, excitedly planning out the space, unaware of the darkness lurking just beneath the surface. It wasn't until one evening, while tinkering with the wiring, that I stumbled upon a hidden compartment behind a false wall. Curiosity getting the better of me, I pried it open, revealing a small makeshift living space, a mattress on the floor, a few tattered blankets, and scraps of food strewn about. Confusion turned to horror as it dawned on me that someone had been living in our basement, right under our noses. I immediately called the police and they conducted a thorough search of the basement, but found no one. They assured us it was likely just a homeless person seeking shelter and promised to keep an eye on the neighborhood. But Sarah and I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over us like a shroud. Days turned into weeks, and the incident faded into the recesses of our minds. That is, until strange occurrences began to plague our home, objects inexplicably moving, whispers echoing through the halls in the dead of night, and a lingering sense of being watched. We brushed it off at first, attributing it to the stress of the move, but as the disturbances grew more frequent and intense, we couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Someone was living in our basement, hidden from sight but ever present, like a shadow waiting to strike. Paranoia consumed us, driving a wedge between Sarah and me as we struggled to come to terms with the horrifying reality of our situation. We installed security cameras, locked the basement door, but nothing seemed to deter our unwanted guests. Then, one fateful night as Sarah and I lay awake in bed, the sound of footsteps echoed through the house, followed by a blood-curdling scream. We rushed downstairs to find the basement door wide open, the lights flickering ominously in the darkness. Heart pounding, I descended into the depths of the basement, a flashlight clenched tightly in my trembling hand. What I found there would haunt me for the rest of my days, a figure lurking in the shadows, eyes gleaming with madness as it lunged towards me with a knife. Instinct took over, and I fought back, wrestling the intruder to the ground as Sarah screamed for help. With a surge of adrenaline, I managed to subdue him, holding him until the police arrived to take him away. As they led him out in handcuffs, I couldn't help but wonder how long he had been living beneath our home, watching us, waiting for his moment to strike. The human aspect of this horror was too real, too close to home. A reminder that evil can lurk in the most unexpected places right beneath our feet. My name is Ryan, and what I experienced in the basement of our suburban home was like something out of a twisted science fiction novel. It's the story of an experimentation gone horribly wrong, a nightmare that still haunts me to this day. It all began innocently enough when I stumbled upon an old laboratory hidden behind a false wall in the basement. The room was filled with strange contraptions, beakers bubbling with mysterious liquids, and a series of notebooks filled with scribbled calculations and diagrams. Intrigued by the discovery, I began to delve deeper into the mysteries of the laboratory, unaware of the horrors lurking just beneath the surface. It wasn't until I found a series of videotapes documenting a bizarre experience that I realized the true nature of the room I had uncovered. The tape showed a man, Dr. Alexander Kane, conducting experiments on unsuspecting subjects, injecting them with strange serums and subjecting them to torturous procedures in the name of science. The subjects writhed in agony, their screams echoing through the dimly lit room as Dr. Kane looked on with a cold, detached gaze. I was horrified by what I saw, but curiosity drove me to continue watching, desperate to uncover the truth behind Dr. Kane's twisted experiments. It wasn't until I reached the final tape that I discovered the shocking truth. The subjects of Dr. Kane's experiments were not strangers, but members of my own family. Fear gripped me as I realized the danger we were in, but before I could react, I heard a noise behind me, a soft, sinister chuckle that sent shivers down my spine. I turned to find Dr. Kane standing in the doorway, his eyes gleaming with madness as he advanced towards me, a syringe in hand. With no other options, I fled, racing through the basement in a desperate bid for escape. But Dr. Kane was relentless, his footsteps echoing behind me as I stumbled through the darkness. It was only through sheer luck that I managed to find a way out, emerging into the safety of the outside world as Dr. Kane's maniacal laugh faded into the distance. As I reflect on the horrors I witnessed in that basement laboratory, I'm reminded of the thin line between science and madness, and the dangers that lurk in the pursuit of knowledge. The human aspect of this horror was all too real, a reminder that sometimes the greatest threats come from those closest to us.